Hey, Colin, nice to see you again.
Brilliant. No, it's very nice to see you again as well.
Well, I'm excited to start this conversation. I feel like you're going to be teaching me a lot today. So, we're going to be talking about digital detox. We're going
Mm.
to be actually informing people around the harm and the dangers of all this advanced technology. And selfishly, I have two girls, they're both teenagers, and I couldn't say no to TikTok because I'm in this position where as a mom, I don't want to deny them from certain things because
Mm.
all their kids are doing it and they're seeing their friends doing it, but at the same time I also see the harm. And when they have that free time, that's all they want to do. They want to go onto the electronics. They're super glued onto the
Mm.
electronics. So I think that this is going to be a conversation that many of us need to hear, whether we are parents with teenagers or whether we're noticing in our own selves that we have this quote unquote addiction, as they call it. And I know we're going to talk about that too, to technology, to social media. And so, welcome, Colin, to the show. And I think before we get started, maybe let's just introduce you a little bit. Maybe you can share with us around your story and how you got to this place where you are now on TEDx and you're speaking about digital detox.
Okay, so it's a slightly long story over many years. So in my mid-30s, I had a fantastic job working on world first technologies. But I suffered stress. Now, it wasn't called stress in those days. So what used to happen is I used to pass out at work. And one of the side effects of stress is the heart rate increases to the point it maxes out, and you get the stars in front of your eyes.
Well,
And so, after all the tests, they found nothing particular. So I thought, you know what, I better get fit again because if I get fit, I train the heart, perhaps that will do the trick. And I had this distant memory of being a really good swimmer. And I thought, okay, they've got a that was in a saltwater lake, but they had a new freshwater swimming pool. So I went swimming 2 lengths of the pool and I was terrible. I was an awful swimmer. And I'm thinking, oh, what's gone wrong here? Because I used to be such a wonderful swimmer. So either I had to get rid of the idea that I was a good swimmer or I had to persevere. But I had to persevere because, in a sense, I'd reached a tipping point. I had to do something. I
right.
had to work, I had to pay the mortgage and all those sorts of things. So I persisted and I got a little bit fitter. Then I took some lessons and learned all the strokes properly.
Mm.
And then I started racing
Mm.
in swim racing. And then I joined a triathlon club and they promised me that I only had to swim. I didn't have to do the other things. And they loaned me a bike and then I started triathlon. And this whole process was interesting because as I got fitter, the stress thing disappeared. The heart just whizzed up and down. It was fine, there's nothing wrong there. Um, but it was amazing how it changed the way I looked at things.
Mm.
And so I looked, well, at this fitness thing, if I train, well, perhaps I can swim a bit further, perhaps I can cycle a bit further. And in the end, I ran a marathon, then I did some Ironman. And well, the swimming was easy. The other bits are really hard. Um, and then I did some Ironman. And so this whole idea of the way that you think, particularly as athletes, you can change outcomes. So I got really interested in the psychology of the mind.
Mm.
And I had an opportunity of leaving the corporate world, leaving technology and deciding what I wanted to do. And I love technology. I've always loved technology and to a certain extent science fiction of where it might take us. And, um, I love this whole mind-body connection
Mm.
because we're not computers. Our brain's just not a computer. It's
100%.
connected. And how we think, it depends on how we feel and what the body's capable of. And then I was fascinated by how much time I was spending on my smartphone. And I'm thinking, well, this is weird. Why is this? And the psychology behind um, why we're so attracted to our smartphones and why we're so attracted to making things easier for ourselves and what the consequences of that might be. So I had an opportunity leaving the corporate world and I mashed these things together. And I thought, brilliant, I can create the digital detox coach, which is 2018. And I can actually say, well, look, there's some behavioral psychology associated with our smartphones, which means that it's the easy option to get lost in our smartphones. But if we get lost in our smartphones, that means we're not doing the other things that we might really want to do. And so the whole digital detox thing is we've got to live in the modern world. We've got to work online. We've got to interact online, but we don't have to be online for everything.
Right.
And we have to get that balance between being online and offline. And digital detox is an enabler. It
Mm.
says willpower is not enough. You get off your phone, then you can decide what it is you really want to do.
Mm.
And so digital detox and all the challenges and methods of doing that is to take you from being online to being offline and getting that balance. So that's a compressed summary.
Wow. So many things came up for me, and I want to unpack many things, but I just want to actually go back maybe to that last thing that you said, where willpower is not enough. Digital detox is an enabler. It sounds like it's opening up space for us to really connect with what it is that we want to create. So, can we just expand on that part a little bit more, and maybe even more specifically discuss what does it mean that willpower is not enough? Is that willpower for us to say, okay, I'm going to commit to a walk every day or start running every day or a particular activity every day? Is it that willpower that we're pouring into that, or is it the willpower for us to actually separate ourselves from our devices?
So willpower is a very interesting thing.
Yeah.
Willpower is effectively our conscious thoughts,
Hmm.
and those take a lot of resources.
Mm.
A lot of uh, scientists believe that willpower is a limited resource. And certainly if we're tired, we just can't be doing with all that thinking,
Mm.
and going online and getting lost down the rabbit hole just is a great thing. Um, because conscious thinking takes a lot of resources, most of what we do is unconscious habits.
Mm. Yes.
And wiring of the brain is about neuroplasticity, about strengthening connections and all those sorts of things. And that's strengthened through habits.
Yes.
So habits can take anything from 60 days plus as a general rule of thumb. And so when we swipe our phones and when we get lost in the apps, we're doing that, thousands of
Mm.
times.
Hmm.
It's that easy.
Hmm.
Now, if you're going to try and use willpower to stop you doing that while you're doing it, it's a bit like being in a sweet shop and loving chocolate and then saying, I don't mind. When I get in the sweet shop, it's all right. I won't have any of the sweets. I won't have any of the chocolate. You might be able to do it, but chances are you won't be able to do it. So willpower is something to be held in reserve.
Hmm.
So you have to create environments to enable you to think. Now, a lot of our
So good.
thinking processes are much slower. So by the time that we've realized what we're doing, we've already swiped.
Right.
It's that quick.
Right.
So digital detox is about separating from your devices to create you enough space to think about, okay, what is it I want to do? I might want to binge watch the latest TV show. That I might want to do that. Or I might want to just scroll on social media. That could be a personal choice.
Mm-hmm.
And that's perfectly okay. But actually, I really ought to get down the gym, or I ought to go for a walk, or I ought to be paying attention to my children. There's lots of things that we ought to do. But on the one hand, this is what really fascinates me. I was lucky. I had a tipping point
Right.
where I had to do something. And the London Marathon's just taken place, and 100,000 applications for the London Marathon, half of which are from people who've never run a marathon before.
Oh.
And there are lots of different reasons, and they're all tipping points. But if you don't have a tipping point, then the easy option is to go on your phone and to do
Right.
nothing. And the harder options are all the things that we really ought to be doing.
Right. Right. Ah, so good. So, one of the things that I oftentimes teach when we're ready to start to shift our habits around nutrition is to audit our pantry, audit our kitchen, audit our environment, right? So if I personally, I notice if I have certain treats in my kitchen or my pantry, and my goal is to stop having sugar because I'm trying to wean myself off sugar. Why? Because it disrupts my sleep. I'm noticing I'm breaking out. I have digestive issues, which really are truth for me when I eat too much refined sugar. So when I notice that these foods are in my kitchen, in my house, it's this constant drive and calling
Mm.
to move towards those food. It becomes much harder. I have to really create massive resistance for myself to avoid those foods. Whereas when they're not in the house and they're not available, I don't even think about them. So I think what you're saying is kind of the same thing, is that while we're on our devices, it's so hard then to look or create space to really connect with what it is that we really want for our lives, or what it is that we want for ourselves. Is that sort of along the
Yeah,
same?
that's correct. Now I've got a little challenge on something we'll discuss later, which is
Yeah.
couch to 5K. Get you off the couch
Right.
to effectively do a digital detox and be more in control. But one of them is the just one thing challenge.
Mm.
And so you set up a rule for yourself, and it's devilishly hard.
Right.
I'm only going to do one thing because we've all done this. I'm in
Mm.
the UK. We love to look at the weather because we really don't know what's going to happen each day.
Like Canada,
Um,
believe me, the exact same thing.
and so I go to my smartphone. I want to look at the weather, but I find myself just checking up a few other things as we all do. And sometimes I might even forget to check the weather.
Yes, right,
So the just one thing challenge is you're only allowed to do one thing on your smartphone,
right.
and that's it. So if I want to check the weather, that's all I'm allowed to do. And I have to come off my smartphone for 10 minutes. So it's really a self-awareness thing.
Mm-hmm.
What are we really doing? Well, I'm going to do the just one thing challenge. And then every time you do more than one thing, and it will happen, you just laugh. Give your smartphone a name and say, you got the better of me that time, but I'm going to, win the next time.
Right,
Don't beat yourself up, but
right.
that's all part of the awareness. So the digital there are mechanisms to control what you're doing and how you're doing it and train your mind to do it. But the best thing is exactly what you were saying, is environment.
Mm-hmm.
The thing about smartphones, and a lot of research has said, if you have a smartphone close by, now we know how attracted to our smartphones we are if they are face up on the table.
Right.
We're even attracted to them if they're within reaching distance, if they're face down. And we're even attracted to them if they're in our bags or pockets because they're too close.
Right. Mm.
So environments is a bit like, the sweet shop.
Mm-hmm.
You have certain areas where you do your screen work and you have your smartphone. And if you want to do something else, make sure the smartphone is a long distance away.
Right.
Very much like the sugar treats.
Right.
Make sure they're not within easy reach. And you create this physical barrier. So you actually have to get up and you have to go to a different room and all those things. And you'll probably find you do that a lot because the smartphone is such an interesting and useful tool in many ways, that you might well find yourself doing a lot more exercise by going from one room to another just to see your smartphone.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I actually started noticing that in me. It's super interesting, this conversation, because I intuitively knew that, again, we're going to come back to this word addiction, but to your point, it was just this constant calling that I had for my phone. And so what I actually started doing was, first of all, I removed all my social media apps from my phone. Now, a big part of my business is on social media. So I still do have to go in and check things on social media, but I didn't want it on my phone because it was just right there. It was so accessible. And to your point, I noticed I'd go in and check an email, or I'd go in and check a message, and all of a sudden it's this rabbit hole. And why am I watching videos? And there's another video. And then I've been on it now for 30 minutes and now I've lost time and I wanted to do something else. And what was it even that I wanted to do? Like, why was I even back on my phone? And so that was the first thing. I removed all the apps. And then before I had done that, I removed notifications because I thought, well, every single time I see a notification come up, all of a sudden I have this need. It's like an urgency. I got to go in and check what that notification is about. So first I removed notifications. That didn't fully solve the issue, but then now I removed all the apps. And now I've also started doing this thing where I intentionally sit in silence when, let's say, I'm in a waiting room at a doctor's office or at the dentist. I normally be with my phone and scrolling through all the things and really trying to distract myself. It's like I was trying to fill up space. But now I
Mm,
intentionally sit in my boredom, just sit in myself without trying to read a book, without doing any of these things, because I find that I'm actually able to be in the present moment. I start to notice things in my environment in a very different ways. I get these aha moments, I get these thoughts,
mm.
insights of creativity. And so it's as if like my mind was able to expand to some other thoughts. And even when I go for walks now, Colin, like as long as it's about an hour, my kids are set, no one's gonna need me, I leave my phone behind. I don't even want to listen to music. And oh my goodness, the things that I actually pick up in my environment, I notice
Mm.
the sky, I notice the color of the sky, I notice the sunset, I notice the birds, and I notice the smells in the air. And so that gives me pockets of time in my day where I really do get to disconnect. And during that time, as I mentioned, that's really when a lot of my creativity actually is allowed, it's invited in. And from there, I now start to have other ideas and really exciting and inspiring things to set in motion.
I mean, you're obviously doing incredibly well. Um, but if you're sitting there and
Mm,
you're not keeping yourself busy, we're in this world where we have to be constantly busy.
mm,
And what that means is that for most people, they're not used to being left alone with their own thoughts.
mm,
And that can be quite scary.
mhm.
So the phone sort of feels the need
Right.
to be constantly busy and distract us, almost like a comfort blanket
Yes.
in many ways. There's some great research done by Professor Gloria Mark on attention spans,
Mm,
and she's been doing research for the last 10 or so years, and the our attention has diminished from about 2.5 minutes about 10 years ago to this magic 47 seconds,
mm,
where we're looking at one screen where we want to look at another screen, and we keep shifting our attention.
right.
And email, interestingly, she found she got a company to switch off emails for a day,
Mm,
and amazing thing. And she did her research again, and she found that the attention spans increased.
hmm.
So just the thought of having an email, there might be a new email. It might be important. I might be missing out on something.
Yeah.
So we talk about social media a lot, but for professional people, email is just as bad.
Wow. Yeah.
But so coming back to being on our own and with our own thoughts, those are much deeper thoughts.
Mhm.
And we can take a really big view of the world and the world around us. And you're quite right. There's a lovely exercise that I was given by a nature specialist, forest bathing specialist. And it was sit down somewhere in nature, and then you notice 5 things that you're looking at.
Hmm.
And then you notice 5 things that you can hear
Hmm.
and you can smell, and you do just go through an exercise just to bring you into the moment.
Wow.
But being by yourself can be scary,
Hmm.
and the distraction of a phone is you can get rid of notifications. But what Professor Gloria Mark found was that um, that when we weren't being distracted, or when the people weren't being distracted by notifications and various other things, they distracted themselves.
Mm.
And
Wow.
so they were so used to distraction, they started distracting themselves,
Right.
which is interesting. And I've noticed that as well.
Yeah.
You know, there's no notifications. Why would I pick up my phone? It's because I'm distracting myself to do that.
Right. Yeah. That's so powerful. And I have to say, for me, this has been a process. And so even just to be able to be at the space where I can sit with myself for 30 minutes, that also comes from my meditative practice. So because I do have a
Mm.
practice of meditation, which by the way was super hard for me to harness at first. I always thought I was that active person who can't sit still for 5 minutes. And so because I feel like I've mastered that practice for myself, I now almost see this as another meditative practice where I'm
Yeah.
now just aware of my mind, aware of the thoughts of my mind versus being super connected with or engaged in what those thoughts are that are coming up. And so these are really powerful things that you're saying. And I hope anyone listening will rewind and go back and listen to some of the exercises that you've shared with us today because they're so, so impactful. But can we talk a little bit also maybe about teenagers or those of us that are
Mm.
parents who are in the space like I shared earlier where I don't want to stop my kids from doing things. I don't want them then to start doing things behind my back. And it's just part of the evolution of our society now. And at the same time, I also want to protect them from first downloading all this information in their mind or also getting super attached to their phone and their devices and social media in general.
So that's a really interesting area. So the first thing to say, if you have young children who have always grown up with online
Mm.
technology,
Yeah.
um, is how the parents use their devices, is what they take to be the norm, the cultural norm at home. Or I haven't seen any research on the particular impact of parental use of smartphones,
Hmm.
but and the effect on their children per se. But if you go back to the old days of smoking,
Mm.
and if parents smoked, then there was a much greater increase of the children smoking,
Yes.
because of the role model being set. Um, there is, if as parents we're preoccupied with our smartphones, and particularly with younger children, and younger children want attention, and if they're looking and they want attention, but you're on your smartphone, oh, it's work, or it's something important. It doesn't matter. They get the feeling of rejection, and they
Yes.
take that with them. So that parent
Mhm.
children relationship about smartphone is really important. And the other thing is, if we frame something as taking something away,
Mhm.
then it's a negative. And there's lots of research that says that we react and value, um, things that are taken away much more than things that are positive.
Right.
Um, the late Daniel Kahneman did loads of great research on that sort of area. So the other way of framing it is to say, well, yes, the modern world, if your children are of the right age and with some parental supervision, then say, look, yeah, you've got this amount of time you can use, and that's yours, and I'm not going to take it away. But if you do all these other things, then you can earn some more time.
Mm.
So instead of it being a takeaway type of process, it's an additive process.
Right. So good.
There's lots of debates about what the right age is for smartphones with younger children, and the real problem with smartphones and the habits and behaviors that are created is that the brain is still developing. There's lots of stages of child development
Yeah.
of the brain. And it doesn't finish until I think it's the early 20s where certain things like empathy
Yeah.
really kick in. So they're a vulnerable um, period, and there's no way of knowing what's real and what's not real. I don't know what's real and not real on the internet.
Right.
There's no way of children knowing. The regulation is much better
Hmm.
than it was because there was no regulation
Yeah.
before.
That's right.
But it's always after the event, after the problems.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Good.
it's a tough one.
Yeah. Yeah, and as you're talking and I intentionally do my best and just watch my thoughts to not be judgmental. And so I just start to notice this more and more when I'm out at a restaurant or I'm out in public and I just see the interactions of families together and even just couples, they're out on a date but they're both on their phones or all four of them, let's say parents with their kids, they're all on their phones and there's no interaction. So I already see, and I think we all have witnessed this already in public, but we're already starting to see that shift where now the attention is no longer on each other. The human connection is not as
Yes.
valued now as our connection with our devices. And so I know that you don't necessarily believe in the word addiction. I agree with you, by the way, for many reasons. But this is something we spoke about when we first connected. And I'm curious why you don't feel that there is this tendency to be addicted to something, or more specifically, let's say, addicted to our devices.
So the reason why I steer clear of addiction, the word addiction, is because it's a medical term.
Right.
And all the medical terms have a sort of a medical basis, a science basis, and it's a very formal thing.
Right.
Um, our sort of, willingness to go on our smartphones all the time, that's behavioral.
Yeah.
Now, of course, in behaviorals, if we get a nice bar of chocolate, we get dopamine and all of those sorts of things, and if we're on our smartphones. But it's not the same thing as a drug addiction or a medication addiction in that sense. And it's a behavioral thing. There was lots of scientists that thought that we were just behavioral animals, that we worked logically and we were just behavioral animals. And a lot of the things we do unconsciously is because of behavior and habits and those sorts of things. But we do have degrees of free will. So with anything which is behavioral, then you can decide to change your behavior using certain tools and practices. And for most of us, our dependence on our smartphones is something we could do something about.
Right.
Because it's a behavioral thing. And that's why I in common language, we always use the word addiction.
Right. Right.
But it's not from everything that I've read in the research, it's not addiction in the medical sense. And if you say that you're addicted, oh, somehow you've got to have medication to get off of it and this, that, and the other. No, for vast majority of everybody, no, you just have to sit down, give yourself a good talking to, have a few special tools and all the rest of it, decide what you really want to do.
Yes.
And actually use some of the same tricks of habit formation to do those other things. Those other things, though, you must really want to do.
Right.
They must, be part of you. Because on the one hand, you've got a smartphone, which is nice and shiny and comes up with notifications and videos of little dogs and cats, and
knows you so well and knows everything about you.
And on the other hand, you got to put some work in.
Right. Yeah. And I'm always also mindful of labeling ourselves, right? Whatever we say about I am addicted to this, I'm addicted to sugar, I'm addicted to my cell phone. We just have to be mindful, because what we're also saying is that we're powerless in some way. And here's what you're saying is that we do have free will. And it's going to be hard at first, and there's going to be effort because, like you said, neuroplasticity, we're rewiring the brain to new patterns. And so that does take effort and repetition. And we have to start in small steps. And so it doesn't have to be this massive drastic change, which, by the way, I see as being one of the reasons why many of us fail when it comes to our fitness transformation goals. It's because there's too many at one time. And so starting with one at a time and slowly stacking each habit is really the way to start to transform our behavior and
it is
have it become us. Yeah.
I mean, we all know about New Year's resolutions.
Yeah, exactly.
And
there it is.
Lots of studies that say a small proportion of people actually set New Year's resolutions, and a very small proportion of people actually achieve any of them. And it's a too big a thing. So small steps is the way to go about. And there's in sports, there's a theory of marginal gains.
Yes, exactly.
And it was more recently made famous by the UK cycling team, where they analysed everything to do with cycling, because our cycling team never used to win anything. And over a period of time, they basically ended up with 60% of the gold medals at the 2012 Olympics. And that was looking at everything that could be changed, but in small steps. And the same with any fitness program. If you're effectively on the couch now and you haven't done any fitness, then to run a marathon might be a too big a step.
100%.
Without a tipping point, so a couch to 5K, which is a great UK thing. 9-week program. It's a free app in the UK from the NHS. So 9-week program, you walk and run, and at the end, you're able to walk, run a 5 kilometers, which is 3.1 miles in old English and American language.
Thank goodness we're all some kilometers. Yeah.
Yeah, and I know people that have used it and they think it's brilliant. You
Yeah.
get help, you get motivation,
It's
and
so
it's a
good.
fantastic thing. So it's all small steps.
Yeah, 100%. We're so in alignment in so many ways. You're so incredibly inspiring, Colin. I've learned so much from you today. And I actually want to ask you a few personal questions that maybe just more about you, your being, who you are as a person, because I truly believe even when we're talking about habits and talking about all of these things that we've been talking about today, why the reason we oftentimes fail is because we're so goal oriented versus really system oriented, which means installing, let's say, the program to run the person that you want to be. Instead of trying to achieve a particular goal, what do you have to do to adjust in your lifestyle so that you are that person? So that goal is just constantly something that you don't have to
Mm.
worry about. You just are constantly attaining it. And so I'm curious for you, just on a personal level, I know you mentioned you started swimming and then you started doing triathlons and you started doing Ironman. Badass, by the way, very cool. But what would you say up until this point has been maybe the most challenging thing that you've ever had to do in your life? Maybe a time in your life where you were met with the greatest form of adversity. And if so, and if there was that moment, how did you overcome it?
So the greatest adversity was really that tipping point.
Mm,
But the greatest challenge that I had about 10 years ago is that I'd never learnt anything off by heart. In all my professional career, I'd had a few PowerPoint slides. I knew the subject. I talked as I was speaking.
mm,
But I was in an organization where we couldn't have any books and any notes. And so you had to learn things. And I'd never done that before. And so I went from learning, doing public speaking with the legs shaking and everything, very small bits, to ending up learning thousands of words
mm.
and effectively being the lead in a play.
Wow.
And the TEDx talk is
Mhm.
has to be by memory.
Yeah.
And my US colleague, Anna Smith, she always wanted to do one. I said, yeah, we do a TEDx talk. And then she had the chance of applying. She said, we should do one together. I said, nobody does them together. And so we put some ideas together and we got into the Lake Superior State University's identity event,
Wow.
which was a bit of a shock for me because then I had to fly to the US to actually do it. So I gave Anna a sort of a crash course in memory learning. And memory learning is about neuroplasticity.
Mhm.
Plasticity is about small steps, little sentences, and then building them up, and having the confidence to be able to do just like sport. So that for me, that was really fascinating because what you learn in sport that you have to train in order to perform is the same in business. It's the same in memorizing. It's always the same. It's always, you've got to put the work in. And it doesn't look like you're making progress, but you will make progress. And, we can't all, I mean, I was lucky enough to swim at the European Swimming Championships for
Wow.
old people, purely because I made the qualification time.
Wow.
And so I swam at the Olympic pool in Stratford and had the name up with the
Amazing.
flag. Of course, got nowhere, but it was a great thing. So we all can't be champions, but for us, we can do our best.
Mm.
Now, I'm going to swim a lake, the longest lake in England, in August.
Wow.
I'm a swimmer, and that's a challenge. Now I know that if I do the practice, I'll be able to swim that lake. But here's the interesting thing: I think we've got age all wrong.
Mm. I agree.
Um, there's a lot of statistics that say that we've stereotyped age in a historical sense, where most people had more manual labor and they popped off in their 60s if they were lucky. Well, that doesn't happen anymore. The average age is 77, 78, I think, in both the US and UK, something around there. And there are loads of people that are 100.
Right.
I mean, the The king has to send telegrams when someone reaches 100. I don't know, it's a full-time job now because there are so many people who reach 100. But we've got the culture that says you're old when you're
Right.
60. So I'm thinking, well, this is all wrong. So I'm going to swim Lake Windermere, and I will be not the fastest, but I'd be in the top 30%, let's say.
That's amazing.
And it's a few days before I'm 65. So, but that's because 65 isn't really 65 anymore. It's 65 is probably 50, 55 in modern
Right.
way of looking at things.
So
So yes, I always experiment on myself to see how it really works out. And then I tend to share afterwards.
wow, that's so good. I love what you said right there, and power to you because it's time to change the stigma around age. And by the way, as we age, we actually have a higher capacity for endurance. We actually become better. We
Yes.
learn patterns, our muscle tissues. And I think the peak is somewhere in the 90s, like when we're 90 something years old. I remember reading this in a
Well,
book. So,
I've got an ambition because I happen to know that in masters swimming, it's every 5-year age groups.
right.
There are some record holders in the 100 to 104 age group, and I think they're Americans,
Yeah. Ah,
and
okay.
they're not too slow in
Right.
the whole scheme of
Yeah.
things. And I'm
Right.
thinking, you know what?
Yeah.
Yeah, I might be in with a chance.
Right. That's so powerful. I love that. And I love what you said too about practice. We practice, 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 practice for when we need it. And that's why I don't believe in the words diet and exercise. I'm just dieting and exercising. No, we're practicing, we're training, we're it's this constant evolution where we're committed to something. And really the majority of the hours happen in that time of practice and not that time of competition or performance.
Mm.
So last final question for you, without regrets, if you could go back to your younger self and give yourself some advice that you wish you had heard, and maybe you could share also with the audience today, what would that be?
I tell you what, when you're younger, um, social interaction is more difficult.
Mm,
You tend to be, generally speaking, quite shy. I was quite shy. And this whole idea of standing up and saying anything or public
mm,
speaking was a real horror. Today, youngsters, they're in a slightly worse position because they don't have to speak to anyone. They can send a text message.
yes.
And a lot of people find this social interaction really, really difficult. So what I would tell myself is, actually, if you can master social interaction when you're much younger, then so many more opportunities will open up. You'll be aware of so much more.
So good. So good. Oh, I just want to hold space for that right now. That is so powerful. And I want to honor you so much for your time today, Colin. I love this conversation. And on that note, because I think I want to leave it there with that beautiful, beautiful last moment of insight. If somebody did want to reach out to you to learn more from you, where could they go to do that?
So I always laugh when I say this because the digital detox coach, and I'm going to say, go to the website, which is online. So we all have to be online. So you go to the website. Now, there are some resources, and I mentioned earlier this Couch to 5K, digital detox couch to 5K. It's a free download. There are no analytics. You don't need to put your name in. You just hit the button, download,
That's
it's
awesome.
free. And the reason why it's that way is because it's based on the Couch to 5K, which is the running. And that's completely free and it has no adverts and that's available to everybody. And in there are weekly challenges. The
Oh, cool.
just one thing challenges in there.
Nice.
There's a social media challenge. There's lots of other challenges and have some fun with it. And every time you do a challenge and it doesn't quite work out, have a good laugh and try again.
I love it. That's so good. Thank you again so much for that. That is so incredibly generous, Colin. And thank you also for your time and this very inspiring conversation.
Thank you very much for having me on your show.